what I'm going to try to do here is just talk about the books that have influenced me. And I put out a few here, and then we'll go up and look at some more in my studio. When I was asked this question to share my library, I was a little overwhelmed with the idea, because it's a very personal thing, actually, the books that you gather. But I realized that there are a handful that have really resonated, and a lot of them that have been really important for different phases. But I'm just going to focus on the ones that I couldn't do without. The ones I'd grab if I had to evacuate, kind of the feeling. I think that was my criteria for putting this together. So, this is a classic, right? For me and for a lot of people in my generation, when this book came out, the ground shifted, I think, beneath our feet, because this is like 1971, Diane Arbus, her first publication, probably came out in hardbound. I got it secondhand. But I think the thing about this book that's so phenomenal for me was that it was authentic and honest in a time that was so fraught by illusion and some preconceived notion of beauty and perfection that had been manufactured in the 50s and the 60s, which is what I grew up with. So, when I saw, these really stark photographs, any one of them, of just how life was, I just felt completely like I'd entered into to something that I could trust in a way, because it wasn't giving me, any illusion. Everyone knows Deanna Arbus. So that was sort of book number one. I was 19 when I first saw that book. Flash forward, I'm not sure exactly when I got this book, although it was also published in 1971, and this is Robert Adams' The New West. So it's a very different agenda, but being from California, being from Southern California, this stark landscape was such a part of my understanding of the world. And so there are like two photographs that completely changed my way of thinking. And let me all of the pictures in this book I've studied extensively, just for their raw simplicity again. I think that was what it was. But this image, can you zero in on that picture? And then I think I could feel the heat and what it meant to come back from the grocery store without a car and walk through a gas station. Now, I don't know for sure, what the other agendas might have been, but that's how I took the book, or that picture. And the sensation of it, there's this other one right here, I think. It's coming up. There it is. This was my experience growing up in the suburbs of LA, in Compton. This isolated woman in a house by herself just gave me chills. And I think we lay our own lives on top of other people's work, which is one of the uses I find of it. So Robert Adams, Diane Arbus, two very different spectrums of the photo world. Both took me to places I had never been visually, but I was so glad they did it. All right, well, standard bearers, again, Walker Evans. When I started doing the South of Market project, Dorothea Lange and Walker Evans were both instrumental and in describing space. And every single photograph and this use of the people in their environment became really critical to me. The idea of how we describe a whole sense of a place, from the literal veracity that the camera brings to be able to carry something from one moment into the future. So these were the photographs that really influenced my South of Market work a great deal. But in combination with Dorothea Lange, I don't have her book out here, but let's move forward to something much more lively, Dorchester Days by Eugene Richards. Amazing. I think the text in this book wait, before we get to Dorchester days, I want to talk about Roy de Carava and Bernice Abbott, and I'll do it sort of because I'm so chronological. Bernice Abbott, again, you know, we're under the influence of her understanding that J, which I could have also brought out, of the simplicity of real life and how phenomenally powerful the simple seeing of something can be. I think that idea of, you know, I was raised with a very traditional attitude, you know, people who were first generation from Edward Weston and Ansel Adams, West Coast, California, black and white photography. So, where you stood and how you saw something was really the language of it. It was very important to see. So, well, I didn't work so much with her science, but her portraits too. Anyway, Bernice Abbott and her description of New York City was powerful. And then Roy de Carava, also in New York City, gave it a whole nother feeling of being able to put mood into something in the way that he handled the light and the simplicity of the images. Again, it's like he transformed really frenetic space into something that was much more, this one. You could just feel being there. So, and this one. So yeah, Roy de Carava, definitely one of my absolute go-tos. All right, so from that very delicate and intense and deep to this really wild and crazy combination of images by Eugene Richards. This is my favorite book of his. I mean, he goes dark fast, and he's a ferocious photographer. But again, I think it goes back to Compton. Everything goes back to Compton for me. But the explicitness, and yet at the same time it's abstract a bit. You know, and so you can kind of layer different meanings in, but then there's no way you can interpret this anything but what it is. But the handwriting of his personal story, of his experience, like I just never entered into that part personally, but I always read it, and I think a lot of times text in photo books does get overlooked. So I think that kind of first-person narrative. I don't know if people know this one very much. Bill Burke, I Want to Take Picture. Well, Bill Burke's known, and this one is probably well known also. You can see an influence from I Saw the Market. I don't know that I even knew he had done this when I decided to use those end pages in the Saw the Market book. But traveling through Cambodia in 1980s, early 80s, the war he didn't go fight because he didn't qualify to be drafted for the Vietnam War, and he goes back to revisit this Asian war when it's still kind of, the ramifications of it are still being felt with the Khmer Rouge, and then he has his personal diary in here, and his, what does it mean to be a photographer, and how do they go about doing it? He just didn't look away from anything either. But then, the layout of the book is pretty wild and loose in a way that I never do. I often am drawn to this kind of more sterile, I guess, or direct approach. But just, writing, it feels more like a family photo album than it does any kind of formal reportage. But he was using a Polaroid camera, which is pretty fascinating, while he was on the road. And then he gets in a motorcycle, or he gets in a big accident, and almost loses everything, and then he gets it. So then, okay, so two more on this table. I think the thing about these books, Dorchester Days, and I Want to Take a Picture, and C. Che Perulia, did I say that right? I don't know. Anyway, again, it's a story, right? It's a story, this is a super well-known book about his relationship to, let's start with one of the pictures that this is such a curious book because it's all about his wife, who you can sense is really suffering from mental issues. She starts off with this sort of wholesome feeling, but then as the pictures progress, you feel her transformation through time and through her mental. And then they have a son, and I think that the thing for me, again, just the singular photograph that, well, I love the juxtaposition of the really unexpected sorts of images. Like these two. I mean, what a combination, right? And the picture here at the end, I think it's the last one. Yeah, there it is. Can you see that okay? Just that birdie up there, just flying on the edge of the frame. Flying on the edge of the frame. It's just like, takes my breath away. So I know he's worked with these pictures a lot, but this is one of those books where somebody lent it to me and I had to go out and buy it when they took it back. And the other thing about this book that's so stark and unusual is this center section where he puts this series of immigrants, I think from Turkey and Germany, who were, and you're just studying their faces in comparison to the other images. I think this is one of my favorite, most brilliant combinations. Photo books are so much more available now, but for most of the time when I was for sure a student and then just getting started and raising my family, I didn't have any extra money for books. It was just not even on the list. And I found this bookstore in Berkeley that just really was phenomenal. It had a pretty good source, and I didn't ever walk by it without going in, and I came out with books every time. So my selections aren't exactly what I was looking for, but sometimes they're just kind of close. Like I wish I had Sweet Fly Paper of Life, but I don't seem to have it. And I wanted to get the New York book that Bernice Abbott did, as opposed to just the collection. And I was looking at my At J book, and it was not exactly what I thought it was. I projected into it. So, yeah, buying books now has gotten to be, somewhere much more available, and there's certainly so many more of them. And I'm willing to put the money in because I finally have a little bit of it. But one more book down here in this part of my library. Brian Ulrich, Photographs. Is this place great or what? Again, it's a book that was very, I think when I was coming up, books were monographs and they would be sort of like a portfolio. Maybe they'd be focused on a theme. But this idea of serious storytelling that really gets into a kind of a narrative arc that has a purpose and gives you, a real point of view is something that I realized were the books that I kept gravitating to. So this one, he starts off, he's really gotten, I love these end page part, he's very much into the shopping mall. Do you know Brian Ulrich's work? You've seen it? He was looking at, I think in response to when Bush said after 9/11 we should just go shopping, and he was like, you gotta be kidding me, right? And then he just did this deep dive into the mall, which is a place I've always hated, and so I was immediately drawn to this critique of it. And his pictures are just, they're on one hand delightfully seductive, with the color and what have you. These photographs name the experience, and I don't know how he really got in there and was able to make these pictures. And then after he did people like in the malls, then he moved to doing, I think, did I just jump into the thrift store part? I think, yeah, it's probably hard to see with that light on it. But these thrift store photographs are also equally as visceral, right? Because I've certainly spent my days in thrift stores. There was a big part of my life, and I still will duck in once in a while. You never know, right? But I feel like I know this guy. I mean, I've looked at this picture so long, right? And whenever I find myself in a mall, I have these pictures with me, But the thing that happens that's so phenomenal, and God used that word once, is, well, he goes to IKEA, which I love, but he does this last section on dead malls. And the dead malls, I mean, it just speaks volumes to what our society is doing. When I was in Target the other day, I was just like, I can't believe all this stuff is produced, you know, and distributed, and what is going on behind all that. The bookshelves downstairs are really kind of I arbitrarily divided older books and newer books. So now I'm starting to get a bigger collection. Sometimes things just appear on my shelves and I haven't necessarily, they just show up, but other things I've very intentionally gotten. So I pulled a few out that I really thought were important to me. This Paul Graham, I'm kind of just like what everybody likes, right? I mean, how can you not like this book? And again, for me, it's super personal. I look at these because I spent a lot of time in the unemployment office. I mean, and these photographs are like so starkly telling of the act of waiting and the incredible mindset, like no cell phones to distract you. They're not even, for the most part, looking at books or reading newspapers. Occasionally there's a newspaper, but they're just kind of lost in their own thoughts, and it just projects the state of being. I mean, and then the juxtaposition with the scenery behind it is so cutting. And then the last picture here of this guy here, just look over my shoulder. It's a good way to see it, possibly. And then this one here. We have many new vacancies each day. If you are still looking for a job, call again tomorrow. Oh my God, that was, when I graduated from college, I was so unemployed, almost unemployable, really. All I knew how to do was make a beautiful silver gelatin black and white print, and it wasn't sufficient or particularly in demand. So, yeah, photographic books that reflect my own direct experience, I think, is what I keep gravitating to. And one of the things, as I was getting ready for today and pulling books to show you, I was sort of chagrined at how few books I had earlier on by women. I had a handful of people, and I should have showed you Susan Masalis' work in Nicaragua, because I wore that book out, really. It was so essential to see her work there in color at that moment when I was starting to go down to Nicaragua and photograph. And Bernice Savin, Dorothea Lange, and a handful of others, but it wasn't really until the last handful of years that we start seeing more books by women. And so I wanted to just talk about a few that I have that, this one really got me. Again, for that very personal reason. This is What She Said by Deanna Templeton. And this is super recent. She took her journals that she did in high school and interwove them with portraits of young girls that looked kind of how she thought she might look, or that she looked when she was this age, and kind of resurrects her experience in the context of what contemporary young girls would be thinking. So it's, again, this juxtaposition of text and imagery that infuses both with such power. And, I had a moment of despair and was considering suicide, I think, if I recall the story specifically, and she negotiated her way through it. But, that coming of age is so rugged. And so I sent this book to my niece, who's just now starting college, as a gift, and she completely resonated with it as well. So I like photo books that work outside the world of photo books, right? That have a place on the shelf of people that wouldn't normally be collecting them. So this book by Irina Rozovsky, In Plain Air, contemporary scenes of Prospect Park in New York. And I really was excited to get this coming in during the quarantine, because I felt like it was offered this beautiful journey into another place that, you know, gives me seasons and texture of outdoor living. And we all spend a lot of time outside, but that kind of public-private experience that comes in parks, and it's just incredibly peaceful. It's really sublime. So how can you not, right? All right. So this was one of my favorites. Also, an earlier book came out with Carolyn Drake, a super strong photographer, but done by TBW. The cover is really fabulous because it's got these fingerprints just sort of worked right into it. And it's got this beginning series where it starts off with the title. And then this really tells you so much about what's coming, and this sense of what's being held back, and this lack of knowing what's happening gives you a real incredible ambiguity to it. Followed by a little playhouse. So the element of problematic domesticity seems to be foregrounded right as the title page comes up, and it's for her mother, which just layers another moment of complexity into it. So I've spent a lot of time trying to suss out it's nonverbal and all of its narrative structure here. You just sense the presence of the building, the relationships that are so subtle but poignant, the fingers, the doll, the blue, everything about this photograph really took me a while. Initially I was unsettled, but now I find that it's like a true visual poem. And then also this one by Vanessa Winship, she dances on Jackson. This is probably one of the best known photos, but she was traveling through the United States and making these portraits of Americans, which just are so succinct. And I like to think about the act of that camera and the interactions that she was having with people. And so this series of portraits, I think when you're stopping people and using that camera, you're creating a whole energy, a whole sense of complexity that people aren't expecting, and they offer that up to you. And then she interjects these other things that are, unexpected snakes, and but this one is so precious. I mean, how do you know when a portrait works, right? It is always that kind of question that we struggle with, but she adds these sort of completely, sublime, boring settings that have some kind of, moment of delight in them that kind of keeps us going. So that one was really good. And then this revisiting of Dorothea Lange's work by Sam Contis also takes this work that I know so well and repositions it in a way that I just would not have seen if she hadn't done it. So, making the case for re-looking at work. Whoops, sorry, Dad. Re-looking at work with fresh eyes and letting us experience it in a different way, which shows how editing and sequencing and all these other things really define work. So it would be interesting to see what Dorothea Lange had to say about it, this book. I'm sure Sam has wondered. She was very strict. Well, those are the highlights, I thought, of my bookshelf